Good morning, book lovers, and welcome to the Thomas Hunt Show, Book Chat Edition, officially titled Book Chat, Unlikely Connections in Disparate Storylines, Motivation Matters, or as I simplified it over on Clubhouse, Book Chat, Everything is Connected, live stream. Except for this chat room. I'll just turn it down. Anyway, we're going to talk about some books today. We're going to talk about Trevor Noah, Born a Crime, Stories from a South African Childhood. How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton M. Christensen. A Promised Land by Barack Obama. And Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. Basically, so I had a power outage yesterday, so I didn't have a lot of internet. I didn't have a lot of battery power or electricity. And I only had these 4 books on my Kindle. So I had no choice but to read little sections of these 4 books. And as it happened, they all tied together. So I'd just like to tell you guys a little story about motivation and about these 4 books. So I started out reading Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime. And Trevor was telling a story about Dutch colonists and kind of the basic story behind how apartheid got started and how South Africa was colonized, the different mixings of the people, the definitions of who was a colored person, who was a black person, who was a white person, who was an Indian person, and that all of these distinctions were made up by the government, and how over and over this would hurt Trevor because Trevor was kind of like a colored person, but he looked more white, so he'd fit in some of the colored neighborhoods, but he wouldn't fit in the white neighborhoods, and he didn't fit in the black neighborhoods, but he spoke African languages. Just a lot of really interesting story about Trevor. And there's one about kind of responsibility for unleashing monsters, where Trevor was attacked by some kids underneath a mulberry tree. And they threw berries at Trevor, and it hurt him a little bit, but it hurt him psychologically so much more. And he says that he was so mad that he knowingly or unwillingly unleashed his stepfather, or soon-to-be stepfather, Abel, on the kids. And that Abel just went over there and beat the crap out of the kid. And that Trevor realized, he says, he was enjoying it. He says right here, he says, Abel was quick. Good Lord, he was fast. The ringleader had made a dash for it and was trying to climb over a wall. Abel grabbed him, pulled him down, and dragged him back. Then he stripped a branch off a tree, a switch, and started whipping him. He whipped the shit out of him, and I loved it. I have never enjoyed anything as much as I enjoyed that moment. Revenge truly is sweet. It takes you to a dark place, but man, it satisfies a thirst. Then there was the strangest moment when it flipped. I caught a glimpse of the look of terror in the boy's face, and I realized that Abel had gone past getting revenge for me. He wasn't doing this to teach the kid a lesson. He was just beating him. He was a grown man venting his rage on a 12-year-old boy. In an instant, I went from, yes, I got my revenge, to, no, 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 too much, too much. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. Dear God, what have I done? Just a powerful story about Trevor's life growing up. After I read that little section of Trevor Noah's book, I went on to a nonfiction book, kind of a self-help book, I guess. It's called How Will You Measure Your Life? It was written by a team of Harvard psychologists and stuff like that. In chapter 2, he says, what makes us tick? And he talks about the importance of getting motivation right. He talks about how he was sharing a story with one of his classes. And they said, well, we have an engineer and we need him to take on another project. And they said, how will we get him to do it? And the student just said, just give him an incentive. And they said, wow, that sure is a simple answer. What kind of incentive do you have in mind? She said, just give him a bonus if he gets it done on time. The problem, the professor said, is that he has other responsibilities on other projects as well. If he focuses on this as his top priority, he's going to fall behind those other projects. So then, what are you going to do? Give him another financial incentive to motivate him to work harder on all the other projects? I pointed to a statement in the case about Bruce. He was clearly a driven man who routinely worked 70-hour weeks. When the student said that's what she would do, I pushed her harder. All the other employees will see that you're giving Bruce a bonus. Aren't they going to demand that you treat them similarly? And where does this all leave? Do you feel like paying them specifically for every assignment, moving to a piecemeal system? I pointed out that in the case, the typical engineers in this company were working very hard every day without incentives. They seem to love their work, don't they? Another student added, I don't think you can pay Bruce an incentive. It violates the rules of the company. It throws things out of balance. He talks again about how in this company, a lot of the senior executives used to be engineers. During that period of their lives, they seemed to be motivated by the work itself. They didn't need incentives, right? So what happened? When they became executives, did they morph into other beings? Types of people that need financial incentives to work hard? Is that what you're telling me? And there's a difference between the two people, and he talked about how some of them were motivated by incentives and money, and the rest of them weren't. He quotes a paper written in 1976 by two economists, Michael Jensen and William Meckling. The paper, which has been one of the most widely cited of the past 3 decades, focused on a problem known as agency theory, or incentive theory. Why don't managers always behave in a way that is in the best interest of shareholders? The root cause, as Jensen and Meckling saw it, is that people work in accordance to how you pay them. The takeaway is that you have to align the interests of executives with the interests of shareholders. That way, if the stock goes up, executives are compensated better, and it makes shareholders and executives happy. Interesting to align the incentives there. I think there's a little more. I'm trying to skip forward. He's talking now about motivation factors. Motivation factors include challenging work, recognition, responsibility, and personal growth. Feelings that you are making a meaningful contribution to work arise from intrinsic conditions of the work itself. Motivation is much less about external prodding or stimulation and much more about what's inside of you and inside of your work. And he talks about how people will work for things other than a large salary. He talks about people on volunteers, Greenpeace, how these people are always incredibly motivated because they're working on what they want to work on. And this is the one of the things we talked about just earlier in the night on a Clubhouse chat with my friend Stephen Mackey. And Mackey and I had both agreed that, you know, making a little bit of money in crypto or making a little bit of money in stocks or whatever it is was nice. But what really mattered to us was getting our time back. Not that we had bad jobs. I worked with Mackey at a startup company, and it was very clean, and we were treated very well. It was fine, right? We could have kept working that job forever. But that job controlled our time. That job controlled our life. Like Mackey said almost instantly, he said, I don't have to get up, jump in the shower, brush my teeth, and head out to work. I can get up, jump in the shower, brush my teeth, and head out to what I want to do. And that makes such a big difference, I've found. Like even right now, you might like this show, you might not like the show, but I'm doing the show for free because this is what I want to do. I want to talk about these books, and that maybe if I share little short parts of these books, you don't have to read the whole book, but you could still get some of the goodness that's in these books. He also talks a lot about his friends at Harvard and how when he goes back to his reunions, at first his friends seem happy and they all have big jobs, but then some of their big jobs goes wrong. One of his friends was Jeffrey Skilling, the Enron CEO, and he seemed like a nice guy in college. He had good motivations, problems with personal life, I guess, but good motivation, seems like a nice guy, and then becomes a massive scammer. He was curious about some of his Harvard people and what had happened to them, and what he felt is that as he talked to them more as the years went by, we're talking like 25 years of reunions into the future here, he said, Worse still, they found themselves stuck. They'd managed to expand their lifestyle to fit the salaries they were bringing in, and it was really difficult to wind that back. They'd made choices early on because of the hygiene factors. That's an idea he's talking about a job being clean or a job being reasonable. It's within things that you want to do. Why you would want to, say, become a corporate lawyer instead of becoming a volunteer on a Greenpeace boat, right? Corporate lawyer has a nice apartment, a nice bedroom. Greenpeace volunteer has a bunk on a ship. You know, it's the hygiene factor of what the job provides for you, what the conditions of the job and what's the conditions of the life that you would have after that job are. He says, they'd made choices early on because of the hygiene factors, not true motivators, and they couldn't find their way out of that trap. The point isn't that money is the root cause of professional happiness. It's unhappiness. It's not. The problems start occurring when the money, becomes the priority over all else. When hygiene factors are satisfied, but the quest remains only to make more money. Even those engaged in careers that seem to specifically focus on money, like salespeople and traders, are open to these rules of motivation. It's just that in these professions, money acts as a highly accurate yardstick of success. Traders, for example, feel success and are motivated by being able to predict what is going to happen in the world and then making bets based on those predictions. Being right is almost directly correlated with making money. It is the confirmation that they're doing their jobs well, the measure they use to compete on. Similarly, salespeople feel success by being able to convince customers that the product or service they're selling will help those customers in their lives. Again, money directly correlates with success, a sale. It's an indicator for how well they're doing their jobs. Interesting stuff about the motivation. He tells another story about how he built a playhouse for his kids and that he had a choice when he built the playhouse. He could have just bought a ready-made playhouse and put it together like an IKEA direction kit. You just follow the instructions, screw the bolts together, and soon you have a playhouse. He didn't. He and his kids collaborated together to design every aspect of the playhouse, and the kids were involved in the construction and the design process. And what he found is he had a great time building the playhouse with his kids, but when it was done, they hardly played with it at all. The fun part was the building and the designing and the interactive stuff they did with their dad. As he says here, I had thought the destination was what was important, but it turned out it was the journey. It's hard to overestimate the power of these motivators. The feelings of accomplishment and of learning, being a key player on a team that is achieving something meaningful. I shudder to think that I almost bought a kit from which I could have quickly assembled the playhouse myself. So it's interesting how the easiest way, the simplest way, might not be the best way. It's not so much about the destination, but the journey. He says here, the second realization I had is that the pursuit of money, at best, can mitigate the frustrations in your career. Yet, the siren song of riches has confused and confounded some of the best in our society. In order to really find happiness, you need to continue looking for opportunities that you believe are meaningful, in which you will be able to learn new things, to succeed, and be given more and more responsibility to shoulder. There's an old saying, find a job that you love and you'll never work a day in your life. People who truly love what they do and think their work is meaningful have a distinct advantage when they arrive at work every day. They throw their best efforts into their jobs, and this makes them very good at what they do. Skipping down a little, he says, in his assessment, it is frightfully easy for us to lose our sense of the difference between what brings money and what causes happiness. You must be careful not to confuse correlation with causality in assessing the happiness we can find in different jobs. The theory of motivation suggests you need to ask yourself a different set of questions than most of us are used to asking. Is this work meaningful to me? Is this job going to give me a chance to develop? Am I going to learn new things? Will I have an opportunity for recognition and advancement? Am I going to be given responsibility? These are the things that will truly motivate you. Once you get this right, the more measurable aspect of your job will fade in importance. So really interesting stuff there about motivation and action and how to choose your job. And while it might seem really simple to choose the job that makes the most money, that might not make you the happiest in the long run. In the same way, the choices that you're making about your time, how you're using your free time, what you're obsessing on, will lead to what you have in the future. Now, I didn't expect the next couple books to be connected to these ideas. It was really quite enough that Trevor Noah's inspiring story was in some ways connection to the motivation story. But at the same time, I started reading former President Barack Obama's book, and it was strange. I don't know if I intend to read this whole book. It's a long one. But gosh, when you start reading him, his voice comes right back. I've read President Obama's previous 2 books, and they were both very good. And when I read this one, I can hear the same exact voice. And of course, I'm envious and jealous at how easily he seems to write, and write at great length. But I still enjoy spending time with him. He's still quite the character. He talks a little bit about his political background, how his parents weren't political. They were Midwesterners from mostly Scotch-Irish stock. They were liberal by the standards of Kansas, but they certainly weren't political. He also talks about one time he'd been teasing a kid at school, and how his mother talked to him about it. She said, "You know, Barry," she said, that's the nickname she and his grandparents used for him when he was growing up, often shortened to Bar, pronounced Bear. "There are people in the world who only think about themselves. They don't care what happens to other people so long as they get what they want. But they put other people down in order to make themselves feel important. Then there are people who do the opposite, who are able to imagine how others must feel and make sure that they don't do things that hurt people. So," she said, looking at me squarely in the eye, "which kind of person do you want to be?" It's a powerful question. He says he felt bad about teasing the kid, as she intended it to, and that her question stayed with him for a long time. Which kind of person do you want to be? He tells another little story about his mother, and I was very much reminded of Trevor Noah's mother in the other book. Noah's mother was equally as revolutionary as Obama's mom. Practically the same story. It's the strangest thing with the racial issues in South Africa. Trevor talked about how his mom seemed to purposely, I'm not sure marry, but she purposely had children with a white man. She purposely broke the racial rules of her society because she thought they were bullshit. And here's almost the same thing, a similar story told about Barack Obama's mother. He says here, "Dismayed by the war in Southeast Asia, she'd end up spending most of her life there, absorbing the language and culture, setting up micro-lending programs for people in poverty long before microcredit became trendy in international development. Appalled by racism, she would marry outside her race not once, but twice, and go on to lavish what seemed like an inexhaustible love on her 2 brown children. Incensed by societal constraints put upon women, she'd divorce both men when they proved overbearing or disappointing, carving out a career of her own choosing, raising her kids according to her own standards of decency, and pretty much doing whatever she damn well pleased." Just a beautiful story about Barack Obama's mother. And it's interesting to note here, just for the purposes of this comparison, certainly Trevor Noah's mother was a black woman. Barack Obama's mother was a white woman, but they were both equally incensed by racism, looking to break through it, not intentionally, sure, but just as the facts are, by marrying people from other races and, essentially doing everything they could, doing their part to end racism for real. Because if we all intermix, this race thing is nonsense anyway. We all know that. But if we all intermix, there'd be even no skin color to discriminate against people. Everyone would just have mixed skin. It would be fine. But just a powerful story, and interesting to see how these two books connected together. I did not expect these connections. Then we talk a little bit more about Barack Obama and what he was doing growing up. And I was interested to find that I had a lot in common with the former president. He says how much he focused on reading. He says, I did find refuge in books. The reading habit was my mother's doing, instilled early in my childhood, her go-to move anytime I complained of boredom or when she couldn't afford to send me to the international school in Indonesia, or when I had to accompany her to the office because she didn't have a babysitter. Go read a book, she would say, then come back and tell me something you learned. He talks about how one time he got a box of old hardcover books at a rummage sale at the Central Union Church across from their apartment. He started pulling out titles that appealed to him or sounded vaguely familiar, books by Ralph Ellison and Langston Hughes, Robert Penn Warren and Dostoevsky, D.H. Lawrence and Ralph Waldo Emerson. And then he ends up taking this box of books home, and he starts reading them instead of doing his schoolwork. And he just gets way into these books. He says, when he finished the first set of the books, I went to other rummage sales looking for more. Much of what I read I only dimly understood. I took to circling unfamiliar words to look up in the dictionary, although I was less scrupulous about decoding pronunciations. Deep into my 20s, I would know the meanings of words I couldn't pronounce. There was no system to this, no rhyme or pattern. I was like a young tinkerer in my parents' garage, gathering up old cathode ray tubes and bolts and loose wires, not sure what I'd do with any of it, but convinced I could prove handy once I figured out the nature of my calling. So I loved both parts of this paragraph. I love the first part where he talks about being unable to pronounce words, yet knowing their meaning. I have that much myself a lot of the time. I read and I read and I read, and I never had to say these things out loud. So it's especially bad when I try to read a quotation or something, and I get on that, one of those French words always throws me. Things like debris, but it's spelled debris, and you sound like an idiot if you say debris. But really, as I've learned later on, it's not just me that has that small problem with our reading and our speaking, but it's everybody that learned words through reading. If you can't pronounce it right, but you know what it means, you probably learned it through reading. And it meant a lot to have old President Obama here with much the same problem. I also enjoy the second part of this paragraph, that there was no system or rhyme or reason to his reading. And I've often felt the same thing, although I generally go through authors. If I find an author I like Douglas Copeland or Bret Easton Ellis, I will read all of their books. And I'm not sure if other people are like that. I'm pretty sure they're not. Also, when I find a filmmaker I like a director, I'll try to see all their movies. But with Obama here, he says there was no system to it. He was just reading. He was just getting the knowledge. And that's, I was reminded of that when I read these 4 sections of these books. I was kind of limited. I didn't have a zillion options on my Kindle. I just finished Sewer, Gas, and Electric trilogy, which was fantastic, by the way, by Matt Ruff. And I didn't know where else to go. I didn't know what else to read. So I found myself reading Obama. He talks about how early labor organizers like Gandhi influenced him and inspired him. And he talks about his time in New York when he was going to college. He says, for 3 years in New York, holed up in a series of dilapidated apartments, Largely shorn of old friends and bad habits, I lived like a monk, reading, writing, filling up journals, rarely bothering with college parties or even eating hot meals. I got lost in my head, preoccupied with questions that seemed to layer themselves one over the next. What made some movements succeed where others failed? Was it a sign of success when portions of a cause were absorbed by conventional politics, or was it a sign that the cause had been hijacked? When was a compromise acceptable, and when was it selling out? And how did one know the difference? Oh, how earnest I was then, how fierce and humorless. When I look back on my journal entries from this time, I feel a great affection for the young man that I was, aching to make a mark on the world, wanting to be part of something grand and idealistic, which evidence seemed to indicate did not exist. This was America in the early 1980s, after all. The social movements of the previous decade had lost their vibrancy. A new conservatism was taking hold. Ronald Reagan was president. The economy was in recession. The Cold War was in full swing. If I were to travel back in time, I might urge the young man I was to set the books aside for a minute, open the windows and let in some fresh air. My smoking habit was then in full bloom. I'd tell him to relax, go meet some people, and enjoy the pleasures that life reserves for those in their 20s. The few friends I had in New York tried to offer similar advice. You need to lighten up, Barack. You need to get laid. You're so idealistic. It's great. But I don't know if what you're saying is really possible. And Obama talks about how he resisted these voices, and he continued to believe, and he fought against the cynicism of his times, and that his ideas spoken aloud in class or over coffee with friends came off as fanciful and far-fetched, and he knew it. He says here, at some basic level, I understood the absurdity of my vision, how wide the gap was between my grand ambitions and anything I was actually doing in my life. I was like a young Walter Mitty, a Don Quixote with no Sancho Panza. He says, Obama continuing, this too can be found in my journal entries from that time, a pretty accurate chronicle of all my shortcomings. My preference for navel-gazing over action, a certain reserve, even shyness, traceable perhaps to my Hawaiian and Indonesian upbringing, but also the result of a deep self-consciousness, a sensitivity to rejection or looking stupid, maybe even a fundamental laziness. So it's pretty impressive to see the president go back here and make a criticism of his younger self. I especially like the way that he's able to admit a possible laziness in his past. And he says in the next paragraph that he took upon himself to purge such softness with a regimen of self-improvement that he's never entirely shed. Michelle and the girls point out to this day, he can't get into a pool or the ocean without being compelled to swim laps. Why don't you just wade, they'll say with a snicker. It's fun. Here, they'll show you how. He made lists. He started working out, going for runs around Central Park. He stripped himself of excess belongings. Who needs more than 5 shirts? And it's funny here because I'm reminded of another book I read part of yesterday, American Kingpin by Nick Bilton. I think that's his name. And it's about, it's allegedly about Ross Ulbricht and the Dread Pirate Roberts, the founding of Silk Road. And this almost perfectly echoes something that Ross said. There was a time when Ross was living on a mattress in a cement basement, and he only had he had a trash bag of dirty clothes, and he had a trash bag of clean clothes, a small stack of books, and that's about all he owned in the world. It's interesting to see these two men so both focused on their goals. So both uninterested in stuff, uninterested in possessions, but interested in the ideas. One of them would become president. One of them is currently still in jail for running a website. Obama talks about his time in Chicago being a community organizer and how it wasn't very successful. But he says, but if my own impact on Chicago was small, the city changed the arc of my life. For starters, it got him out of his own head. I think this is an important part of the transition between Barack Obama, the monk sitting in his apartment, reading books, writing journals, and Barack Obama out in the world. He took this step. He wasn't always this way. He expanded his possibilities. He started working out. He started getting involved in things. As it says here, he started going out and talking to people and talking about their issues. And he found, rather than becoming more negative or becoming depressed by people's issues, he became more engaged. He became more empowered. These people had problems. They wanted to solve them, and he wanted to help them solve their problems. He talks about how when he had just arrived in Chicago, there had been a major movement to elect Harold Washington to mayor. Harold Washington, a black man, was elected mayor, but then the entire city council turned against him, and how they had stopped him from doing any of his improvements, and then eventually he had to throw out the city council, and then sadly, Harold Washington passed away. This was a major lesson for Obama, and he says here, far from the center of the action, I watched this drama unfold and tried to absorb its lessons. I saw how the tremendous energy of the movement couldn't be sustained without structure, organization, and skills in governments. I saw how a political campaign based on racial redress, no matter how reasonable, generated fear and backlash and ultimately placed limits on progress. And in the rapid collapse of Harold's coalition after his death, I saw the danger of relying on a single charismatic leader to bring about change. So those were important lessons. He continues a few pages later. But maybe there was another way. Maybe you could generate the same energy, the same sense of purpose, not just within the black community, but across racial lines. Maybe with enough preparation, policy know-how, and management skills, you could avoid some of Harold's mistakes. Maybe the principle of organizing could be marshaled not just to run a campaign, but to govern, to encourage participation and active citizenship among those who had been left out, and to teach them not just to trust their elected leaders, but to trust one another and themselves. Then he talks about how the wiser and stronger voices in his life convinced him to stop organizing in Chicago and to go to New York and become a lawyer. As his mom said, I don't know, Bear. You can spend a lifetime working outside institutions, but you might get more done trying to change those institutions from the inside. Plus, take it from me, she said with a rueful laugh, being broke is overrated. So then he finds that he goes to Harvard Law School, has a different kind of person there, but he fits in and he becomes editor of the Black Law Review, or the Law Review, the first black head of the Law Review, which generated some national press. He got a contract to write a book, and everything went forward. And the next chapter, I think, is going to be about Michelle Obama, but I haven't gotten there yet. So it's interesting to hear Obama talk about similar things as Ross Ulbricht, the focus on not having stuff, the focus on his ideas. And again, what Obama's really saying there is the same thing that Mackie and I were talking about in our chat yesterday, that your time matters. Barack Obama's 3 years reading books, writing journals, staying in his apartment, apparently smoking a lot of cigarettes, that was his time. He got his time back, and he used it to think and to build this model of himself as a greater man, which he then took out into the world, and as you can see, was incredibly successful with. I didn't expect the next book to be connected at all. I read the next book. I've read it a couple times. I read it when it came out. I read it a few years later, and it keeps coming back. They haven't made a good movie of it yet. Amazon was supposed to a few years ago, but it didn't happen. I just read a bit of an article. They said the screenwriter had to write other stories at the time, and he was worried that Snow Crash wouldn't be done well, and he didn't want to do it if it wasn't done perfectly. So Snow Crash is a beautiful book about internet, technology, cyberspace, and pizza delivery. So one of the things about pizza delivery, and I'm going to start by reading the first couple pages. There's some incredible quotes in here. But pizza delivery in the time of Snow Crash is run by the mafia. And the mafia is very serious about their pizza delivery. And what's great about this is, against all odds, as a complete surprise to me, not planning out these books, just reading small sections of them yesterday, which again is one of the best features about a Kindle. I don't know about you. I've always read multiple books at the same time, different kinds of books. I'll read like a political book and a biography, and I'll read a science book, and I'll read a story book, and I'll read all these at the same time. And I don't seem to have any problem just picking up from where I left off. So maybe that doesn't work for you or for other people at your own, decisions and stuff. But I just love to have the options. And the Kindle does that. As you can see, I was able to read small sections of all these completely different types of books, all from the same device, from the same, sitting area. So I didn't have to get up. Usually I carried around stacks of books. But before we talk about motivation and the motivation of delivering pizzas for the mob, I want to read you the best quotes from the first couple pages of Snow Crash, which really starts out with a bang. Like if you're looking for something to read and you want something light and fun that starts out really good, Snow Crash is the book. Ends a little abruptly, but that's Neil Stephenson's problem. He doesn't end well. It's not a bad problem to have. You get 99% of the way there. So he's talking about the Deliverator's car and how well it's equipped, and I'm going to skip that because it's just not important today. But why is the Deliverator so equipped? Because people rely on him. He's a role model. This is America. People do whatever the fuck they feel like doing. You got a problem with that? Because they have a right to. And because they have guns and no one can fucking stop them. As a result, this country has one of the worst economies in the world. When it gets down to it, talking trade balances here, once we've brain drained our technology into other countries, once things have evened out, they're making cars in Bolivia and microwave ovens in Tajikistan and selling them here. Once our edge in natural resources has been made irrelevant by giant Hong Kong ships and dirigibles that can ship North Dakota all the way to New Zealand for a nickel, once the invisible hand has taken all those historical inequities and smeared them out onto a broad global layer of what a Pakistani brick mayor would consider to be prosperity, you know what? There's only 4 things we do better than anyone else. Music, movies, microcode, parentheses software, and high-speed pizza delivery. He talks about how he used to do software and how he didn't fit in with people, how they've solved the problem of whether or not the pizza is delivered on time. They now have timers on the boxes. The boxes slide into a mainframe type system in the cars, so you know exactly how much time you have left on your delivery. And of course, this is all about that 30 minutes or less guarantee they offered in the 80s from Domino's, which led to pizza drivers driving on sidewalks and skidding out around corners and all kinds of other extreme measures that they took to deliver those pies. And he talks about why he drives for the mafia. Not just that he's not good at working with other people and he doesn't want to write software, but he talks about the seriousness of driving for the mafia, and it sounds like he's describing a flow state. He's driving how much is at risk, and because so much is at risk, if he delivers a pizza late, the head of the pizza company, Uncle Enzo, has to fly out to your house in a helicopter and apologize to you. They have to pay you off, basically, because of the late pizza. So it is very important. It's a high-stress job. If he does not deliver the pizzas on time, he's toast. Why would he take this kind of job? Why would he drive for such a stressful company when he could just be a coder somewhere? And here's what the main character of the book, the protagonist, the hero protagonist, that's his name, hero protagonist, funny. Here's what he says. You know why? Because there's something about having your life on the line. It's like being a kamikaze pilot. Your mind is clear. Other people, store clerks, burger flippers, software engineers, the whole vocabulary of meaningless jobs that make up life in America, other people just rely on plain old competition. Better flip your burgers or debug your subroutines faster and better than your high school classmate 2 blocks down the strip is flipping or debugging, because we're in competition with those guys, and people notice these things. What a fucking rat race that is. Cosa Nostra Pizza doesn't have any competition. Competition goes against the mafia ethic. You don't work harder because you're competing against some identical operation down the street. You work harder because everything is on the line. Your name, your honor, your family, your life. Those burger flippers might have better life expectancy, but what kind of life is it anyway, you have to ask yourself. That's why nobody, not even the Nipponese, can move pizzas faster than Cosa Nostra. The deliverator is proud to wear the uniform, proud to drive the car, proud to march up the front walks of innumerable burb-clave homes, a grim vision in ninja black, a pizza on his shoulder, red LED digits blazing proud numbers into the night, 1232, 1515, or the occasional 2043. So it's interesting here how the deliverator, the mafia pizza man in the exciting futuristic world of Snow Crash, is basically echoing what the Harvard professor was saying about the motivation and how will you measure your life. The kid said they could just pay the engineer more. If they paid him more, he'd work harder, he'd take on the extra project. But that's not what Hero's saying here. Hero's saying when he joined the pizza force, when he joined Cosa Nostra, the mafia pizza, it gave him pride. All the other pizza drivers are trying just as hard as Hero. They all have the same punishment if they're not there in 30 minutes or less. They're all, pizza jockeys, right? They're out there on the line. They're aggressive. They're wild. They're, kind of like those people, I guess, on the deep greatest catch, right? They're out there on that ship. They're bringing in the tuna or the whatever fish they bring in, and they could have less dangerous jobs. They could fall off the deadliest catch, maybe it's called. They could fall off the side of the ship. They could get knocked over. It's very cold. It's wet. It's uncomfortable. It just sounds awful, right? But they choose to do that. The fish jockeys, these pizza jockeys, they choose not because of the money or the incentive, although they do get paid well in the end if they bring home the catch, if they don't fall off the boat. But they choose this because it interests them. It motivates them. They're a part of it. It's not just the incentive. So when you're thinking about this, and a lot of people are pretty obsessed with earning money, no one's in my Clubhouse chat, but if they were, that would be them. They're interested in these stocks, and they're interested in the Bitcoin and the Dogecoin today, I guess. And that's just money. And like the Harvard guy said, like all of his friends, all of his fancy Harvard people went out and got these big jobs, made lots of money. And as I myself had noticed when I used to work for corporate lawyers, they didn't seem hardly any happier than anyone that had normal jobs, right? They made lots of money. They had fancy cars. They had fancy houses and beautiful wives and children and all this stuff. They weren't very happy. They seemed crazy stressed out all the time. And they were always trying to pay the mortgage on their bigger things. I had a mortgage too, but my mortgage was small. Their mortgage was big. I had a car too. It was old and used. They had a new car. Again, they were paying for this though. they didn't really have that freedom. Like now, I don't have very much, but I'm free. I have my time. I choose what I want to work on. Your name, your honor, your family, your life. Those burger flippers might have better life expectancy, but what kind of life is it anyway? You have to ask yourself. So again, these were 4 books that were connected together in an unlikely way. Trevor Noah, Born a Crime, Stories from a South African Childhood. How Will You Measure Your Life? By Clayton M. Christensen, James Allworth, and Karen Dillon. A Promised Land by former President Barack Obama. And Snow Crash by Neil Stephenson. So obviously I recommend all these books. I've read Snow Crash before. The other ones are all new to me. The Trevor one's kind of fun because he's also reading it to me. His book was on sale for $3, and Amazon was selling the narration for an extra $7. So that's $10 for an audiobook and a normal book. So I went ahead and pulled the trigger on that one. And I've been enjoying it. I know a lot more about Trevor. I still don't know if he was the best choice to host The Daily Show. I think he's pretty amazing on his own. I really like Sam B. Of course, John Oliver would have been a good get. Colbert. So many people from The Daily Show have had other success. It's kind of spread the talent all over. But I'm enjoying learning more about Trevor's background and about South Africa, which I knew about just generally. But to hear the details, and to hear the details of, like you said, I mean, a law saying that you can't marry or you can't have relations with people from other, skin colors. It's just ridiculous nonsense. But really enjoying it. I like this one too, but I'm just starting. This one's a surprise. He's just such an engaging author. I don't want to read 800 pages, but he's so engaging. And one of the things he said, it wasn't about motivation. I didn't talk about it today, but in the earlier chapter, he talked about, and well, he didn't intend the book to be so long, but he wanted to give people a feeling of what it was like to be president, like a fly on the wall. And he wanted to give some of the motivation behind his decisions. And the book just kept getting longer and longer. Just such a likable writer on the page, just really enjoyable. And Snow Crash, I kind of loaded it on my Kindle to try it out, and every time I do that, I probably end up reading it. And that's fun because it's super fun. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this little book chat today. I was going to try to bring in some people here on Clubhouse, but no one wanted to listen to me talk about books to then join the after chat. So it looks like there might be a couple people watching on Periscope. Our only viewer on Twitch, so shout out to our one viewer. I hope you'll subscribe. This isn't the normal World Crypto Network fare, so I didn't put it on the YouTube, but it is on some of the other platforms. But yeah, I just wanted to talk about books, the connection between things, motivation, and the ability to choose what you want to do and to know what that is. So you've got some homework assignments. You've got some things to think about. But thanks so much for joining us on this little book chat here. We had a great time, and we hope to see you again soon. Give us a thumbs up and a subscribe down below. This is mainly on the Thomas Hunt Show YouTube, so it's just a place for me to do shows that aren't about Bitcoin, that might anger people politically, and that kind of thing, stuff that's off topic. So if you like off-topic Thomas Hunt, come check this out. I can tell you over at Clubhouse, everything is all about stocks. Everything's all about Wall Street bets and Bitcoin bets and today Dogecoin bets. So as ineffective as it is, we're trying to counter-program that and give you something to think about more than just money. So it's up to you if you can handle that. But thanks so much for joining us. Until next time, bye.